Winter didn't just slow armies on the Eastern Front, it erased them. Trucks froze, horses collapsed, and convoys disappeared into drifts. In that white chaos, one squat tractor kept crawling, the Raupenschlepper Ost. Short, boxy, and utterly ungainly, it dragged guns and rations forward, its air-cooled Steyr engine hammering against the cold. It looked like a farm tool on the wrong continent, but it refused to stay in the barn. The first months of the German invasion of the Soviet Union exposed a brutal truth. The Wehrmacht could advance quickly, but it could not sustain itself. Roads dissolved into deep ruts, supply convoys stalled, and the thin-wheeled trucks Germany relied upon became stranded in terrain that seemed almost designed to defeat them. Officers reported entire columns immobilized not by combat, but by mud. When winter arrived, the same rutted tracks froze into jagged trenches, locking vehicles in place. Mobility, not firepower, became the army's most fragile asset. The German High Command recognized a structural weakness that predated the campaign. Their logistics doctrine had been built around a short war on European roads, not an endless advance across marshland, steppe, and forest. Horse-drawn wagons still carried a huge share of supplies, but millions of animals could not be fed and sheltered indefinitely. When the horses failed, the front line starved. A mechanized, lightweight, all-terrain support vehicle was no longer desirable. It was essential. Industry faced the same constraints. German factories were already overburdened, producing tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Whatever new vehicle emerged would need to be simple, cheap to manufacture, and capable of using engines already in production. Complexity, the hallmark of many German designs, would only choke output. The requirement was for a machine that could be assembled quickly and survive the filth, frost, and distance of the Eastern Front without constant maintenance. This was the environment into which the Raupenschlepper Ost was conceived. It filled a gap that more sophisticated machines could not. With a high ground clearance chassis, wide track links, and an air-cooled petrol engine unaffected by the freezing temperatures that seized liquid-cooled rivals, it offered a practical answer to the terrain crisis. It was not fast, nor elegant, nor powerful, but engineering sometimes rewards the honest solution over the ambitious one. Crews were initially unimpressed by its agricultural appearance, though they quickly learned that aesthetics offered no help when a convoy disappeared into sludge. One officer complained that the RSO looked like it belonged behind a plough, but on that road I'd have taken the plough as well. The need for such a machine defined the RSO's existence. Germany didn't build it because they wanted to. They built it because the Eastern Front left them no alternative. The design brief for the Raupenschlepper Ost was not born in a drawing office, but in a crisis. Reports arriving from the Eastern Front described the terrain in unforgiving terms. Marshes that swallowed lorries, roads that were roads only on maps, and weather that treated machinery with outright hostility. Engineers at Steyr were instructed to abandon convention and focus instead on what the front actually needed: a tractor that could move in conditions where logic said movement should be impossible. The doctrine behind its creation was pragmatic rather than visionary. German High Command understood that logistics could no longer rely on the traditional split between horses and trucks. The distances had grown too large, the climate too hostile, and the army too dependent on continuous supplies. This demanded a vehicle that acted less like a truck and more like a tracked utility platform. Its purpose was not to look modern. Its purpose was to function where everything else failed. Designers debated alternatives. Some wanted a modified half-track, but those were already labour-intensive and expensive to construct. Others suggested adapting agricultural crawlers. Yet these machines were too slow and incompatible with military towing standards. A few even proposed a compact, fully tracked carrier with armour, an idea quickly dismissed as wasteful, given that armour would add weight and undermine the very mobility the army needed. What emerged from these discussions was a machine defined not by ambition, but by ruthless elimination of anything unnecessary. 3 technical principles shaped the final concept. First, the vehicle needed an air-cooled engine to avoid the coolant freezing failures that had crippled liquid-cooled designs in previous winters. Second, it required wide tracks with low ground pressure, ensuring it would float over mud instead of burrowing into it. Third, the chassis had to be simple enough for low-skilled labour to produce at speed, with sheet metal cabwork and minimal welding complexity. The result was a vehicle built around function rather than prestige. Crews later noticed that this philosophy produced a machine that felt deliberately plain. Nothing on the RSO existed for comfort or aesthetics. It was created to survive, not impress. One mechanic remarked that the designers removed everything except the bits that actually did something, capturing the austerity at the heart of its conception. In the end, the RSO's vision lay in accepting the realities of the Eastern Front and designing a machine humble enough and stubborn enough to work within them. Production of the Raupenschlepper Ost began under conditions that mirrored the very environment it was meant to conquer, harsh, overstretched, and constantly shifting. Steyr's factories were already labouring under wartime demands, and the RSO had to fit into an industrial ecosystem that had no patience for refinement. Its construction reflected a ruthless prioritization of materials, time, and workforce capability. Where other German vehicles suffered from over-engineering, the RSO was deliberately pared back to essentials. The chassis was assembled from straightforward steel sections that required minimal machining. Instead of complex castings, the vehicle relied on welded components that could be produced quickly by semi-skilled labour. This approach sped up output dramatically, allowing even satellite workshops to contribute parts. The cab itself was a study in austerity, flat panels, sharp edges, and just enough structural integrity to survive the front. There was no pretense of comfort. If the cab kept snow off the driver and stones from the road, it met the specification. At the core of the machine was the Steyr V8, an air-cooled engine selected not for power but for reliability in freezing conditions. Liquid-cooled engines required antifreeze and constant monitoring. The Steyr unit demanded neither. It could run in deep winter with little more than a clean fuel line and a cooperative starter motor. Its simplicity made workshop maintenance easier, and replacement parts could be fabricated when supply chains faltered. Engineers considered this mechanical pragmatism one of the RSO's most important virtues. The track system required careful balancing. Engineers designed broad links to distribute weight evenly, reducing ground pressure to levels that allowed the machine to float across mud. The suspension, based on uncomplicated leaf springs, sacrificed refinement for durability. It offered little in the way of ride quality, but it was resilient, forgiving, and easy to repair with basic tools. What it lacked in sophistication, it repaid with stamina. Assembly lines adapted quickly. Workers appreciated the clear structure of the vehicle, large, accessible components, generous mounting points, and minimal hidden mechanisms. These features meant that even hurried production rarely resulted in catastrophic defects. One factory supervisor joked that the RSO was almost impossible to build wrong, a rare compliment in an industry strained beyond capacity. By the time mass production was fully underway, the RSO had become exactly what its creators intended, a machine created not by grand engineering ambition, but by necessity, built quickly, cheaply, and purposefully for a front that punished everything else. Testing the Raupenschlepper Ost in controlled conditions never truly reflected what awaited it on the Eastern Front, but field trials still revealed much about the machine's temperament. Early prototypes were dispatched to muddy training grounds where engineers observed how the tracks bit into the earth, how the suspension coped with uneven ground, and how the air-cooled engine behaved under strain. Drivers found that the RSO demanded a firm hand on the levers. Its steering was direct, almost abrupt, but predictable once mastered. The machine excelled in mud. While trucks bogged down within meters, the RSO churned forward with steady torque, leaving a distinctive shallow track pattern that suggested a vehicle far lighter on the ground than its rivals. This low ground pressure meant that even when the mud rose to the hubs, the vehicle continued to crawl, propelled by its wide tracks and uncomplicated drivetrain. The trials also showed that the engine resisted icing better than expected, its fan-driven cooling system preventing the temperature extremes that crippled other vehicles. Snow testing followed. Prototypes were run at dawn when frost was thickest, and again at night when temperatures plunged. The RSO's ignition system performed adequately in the cold, though drivers complained that starting it required patience and occasionally creative language. The cab, uninsulated and drafty, allowed little reprieve from the weather, but engineers dismissed comfort concerns as secondary. The focus was resilience, not refinement. The suspension revealed its limitations during high-speed runs. At anything above a modest pace, the vehicle bounced violently, shaking tools loose and leaving drivers with sore backs. Engineers accepted this trade-off. The RSO was meant to move consistently, not quickly. Its ability to tow artillery pieces across terrain that would stop wheeled vehicles justified the discomfort. One test driver muttered that the RSO rode like a wheelbarrow on a trampoline, a comment that spread quickly through the ranks. Operational testing added further insights. The machine handled inclines well, gripping slopes that rival vehicles failed to negotiate. Its turning radius was tight for a tracked chassis, allowing maneuvers in confined spaces and forested areas. Fuel consumption, while not ideal, was acceptable given the engine design. Most importantly, it tolerated neglect, a vital trait in a war where maintenance was often improvised. By the end of testing, the RSO had proved itself not as a refined machine, but as a dependable one. It would not win races, but it would reach places other vehicles never could. When the Raupenschlepper Ost entered full operational service, it was not expected to become a breakthrough asset, yet circumstances thrust it into that role. On the Eastern Front, where mud and frost routinely halted offensives, the RSO provided mobility at moments when the German army's momentum risked collapsing entirely. It towed anti-tank guns into positions unreachable by any truck, ferried supplies across improvised routes, and retrieved stranded vehicles that otherwise would have been abandoned. Its slow but certain progress allowed units to maintain limited operational tempo in conditions that favoured stagnation. One of its most significant successes emerged during winter withdrawals. As German forces fell back under pressure, the RSO proved indispensable in evacuating artillery and ammunition before encirclement-tightened units often credited the vehicle with preserving firepower that would otherwise have been lost. Its ability to operate without prepared roads allowed retreat columns to avoid choke points, reducing casualties during rearguard actions. These practical contributions rarely appeared in official reports, but commanders understood their value. The RSO nevertheless faced limitations. Its low speed made it vulnerable under fire. Towing a heavy gun uphill could reduce its pace to a crawl. The vehicle's high profile made concealment difficult, and crews were exposed to the elements in a cab that offered no meaningful protection. When used near the front line, it relied on infantry screens to survive. In addition, the engine lacked the torque required for the heaviest guns, restricting its use to lighter and medium artillery. For these reasons, it was never considered a tactical asset, only a logistical one. Mechanical failures occurred, though not on the scale suffered by more complex vehicles. Track links occasionally bent under lateral stress, and the clutch wore quickly under heavy towing. Field workshops learned to strengthen mounting points and reinforce springs to handle local terrain. These modifications, made at battalion level, reflected the RSO's practical adaptability. One crewman joked that the official manual was more suggestion than scripture, highlighting the improvisation necessary for field success. Despite its shortcomings, the RSO achieved what few wartime vehicles managed. It fulfilled its intended purpose. It kept supplies moving when nature tried to stop them. In a war often defined by mobility failures, that alone made it a quiet breakthrough. The Raupenschlepper Ost was never designed to influence strategy, economics, or political decision-making. Yet its presence across the Eastern Front created consequences that rippled far beyond the simple movement of guns and crates. By functioning reliably in terrain that neutralized most trucks, the RSO inadvertently reshaped German logistics. Supply officers began planning routes under the assumption that these tractors could traverse ground previously thought impassable. This created a quiet but tangible shift in operational behavior. Commanders became less dependent on major roads and more capable of dispersing forces across wider, more flexible fronts. Economically, the RSO highlighted a growing contradiction within German industry. While many advanced vehicles demanded precision machining, scarce alloys, and high-skill labor, the RSO proved that effectiveness could be achieved through simplicity. Its largely stamped construction consumed fewer strategic materials, used basic steels, and avoided the bottlenecks associated with complex half-tracks. This exposed an uncomfortable truth for planners. Germany's industrial system was overcommitted to sophisticated machines unsuited to mass production. The RSO stood as an unspoken critique of this approach. The tractor's reliability also shaped morale in subtle ways. Infantrymen accustomed to watching supply lines collapse during winter began to trust that essential equipment would arrive. Units defending remote positions received ammunition in conditions that would have stranded other convoys days earlier. These quiet successes reinforced local confidence, even as the broader strategic picture deteriorated. Soldiers learned to associate the squat little tractor with continuity. When it appeared over a ridge, they knew the line would hold a little longer. Intelligence analysts observed another effect. Soviet forces sometimes overestimated the strength of German positions when they spotted RSOs behind the lines. The presence of multiple tractors suggested a functioning logistical spine, even when units were operating on the edge of collapse. This misperception occasionally bought time, a commodity often more valuable than material. Diplomatically, the RSO influenced occupied territories in a different way. Its agricultural appearance and civilian-derived engineering blurred the line between military and farming equipment. Local workshops found themselves maintaining RSOs alongside farm tractors, creating brief zones of cooperation in otherwise strained regions. One technician remarked that the RSO was the only German machine locals didn't immediately blame for something, a dry observation that captured its unusual social footprint. Though never intended as such, the RSO became a quiet agent of continuity, shaping logistics, labor, perception, and morale in ways few vehicles of its class ever did. When the war ended, the Raupenschlepper Ost did not fade quietly into the background. Many surviving examples were snapped up by farmers, forestry workers, and construction crews across Central and Eastern Europe. They recognized in the RSO something the battlefield had already proven, a machine that could keep moving when the ground turned against it. The same wide tracks that pulled artillery through snow now hauled timber, ploughed through saturated fields, and climbed muddy inclines that stopped wheeled tractors dead. The simplicity that had been a military necessity became a commercial advantage. Engineers studying post-war mobility took note. The RSO's low ground pressure and straightforward drive system influenced early cold weather vehicles built in Scandinavia and the Soviet Union. Although these machines were far more refined, their designers acknowledged the logic behind the RSO's layout: a small, lightweight chassis carrying a wide track system optimized for soft terrain. Its engineering philosophy, rather than its components, carried forward. The RSO's legacy also extended into military experimentation. Several nations evaluated captured examples, exploring how lightweight tracked haulers could complement or replace more complex support vehicles. While no direct copy ever emerged, the idea of a cheap, rugged, all-terrain supply tractor resurfaced in multiple doctrines during the 1950s. The lesson was consistent. In extreme climate zones, mobility mattered more than sophistication. Restoration efforts today highlight the vehicle's endurance. Collectors often remark that RSOs, even after decades exposed to weather, can be revived with modest workshops and accessible tools. Sheet metal cab panels are easy to fabricate, the engine tolerates age surprisingly well, and the tracks, though crude by modern standards, are resilient enough to return to working order. One restorer joked that the RSO is held together by stubbornness and whatever bolts it hasn't shaken loose yet, neatly capturing its personality. Modern enthusiasts value the tractor for what it represents: a pragmatic response to impossible conditions. Unlike many World War II vehicles associated with glamour or power, the RSO's legacy lies in sheer practicality. It did not inspire awe, it inspired confidence. That, in its own quiet way, became its most enduring contribution. Today, restored examples running at demonstrations or museums show more than machinery. They illustrate an engineering lesson still relevant. When complexity collapses, simplicity continues moving. The Raupenschlepper Ost began life as a silhouette against snow, carving a path through conditions that humbled far grander machines. Returning to that image now, its purpose becomes clearer. The RSO did not dominate battlefields or alter strategy in sweeping gestures. Instead, it shaped outcomes through consistency. German units depended on its stubborn traction and unfussy engineering at moments when the environment threatened to silence entire formations. Its story is not one of triumph, but of persistence, and the engineering philosophy that underpinned it still carries weight. One of the most revealing aspects of the RSO's legacy is how it demonstrated the value of prioritizing environment over ambition. On the Eastern Front, where temperature, terrain, and distance were as lethal as any opponent, vehicles could not afford fragility. The RSO succeeded precisely because it embraced the realities of mud, frost, and logistical strain without attempting to outsmart them. Its air-cooled engine ignored the cold rather than fighting it. Its broad tracks worked with the terrain rather than trying to defeat it. These principles resonate far beyond the war that birthed them. The RSO also speaks to the understated power of machines that perform unglamorous roles. It hauled equipment, delivered ammunition, towed guns that lacked the luxury of roads, and through these modest tasks enabled operations that would have otherwise stalled. There is a quiet dignity in such machinery, the kind that earns respect not through spectacle, but through reliability. One historian remarked that the RSO was never admired, only trusted, which, for a support vehicle, is far harder to achieve, a sentiment that captures its unusual place in wartime engineering. Even today, the tractor's reputation persists in the communities that restore it, study it, or operate it in demonstrations. Observers see not a relic of lost ambitions, but a testament to practical problem-solving. It remains a reminder that engineering, at its most effective, solves the problem directly in front of it, without ornament or complication. The RSO solved the problem of movement in a theatre where movement itself had become uncertain. In the end, the Raupenschlepper Ost stands as a factual embodiment of wartime necessity, a machine defined by terrain, shaped by scarcity, and proven by endurance. Its legacy is not dramatic, but it is unmistakably real.